This screencast is designed to help students studying the Edexcel certificate, that is to say, the element of the IGCSE which is licence for study in state schools, their English language paper 1. It's thoughts that have come to mind having just marked a mock exam on the paper, but also just to help students to organise their thoughts as they approach this particular paper. The screencast is based on material that was designed as a May 2012 exam, the sample material, which is available actually online on the Edexcel websites if people care to look. And if we just look very quickly at the facts of the paper, it's 2 hours 15 minutes long. You're advised to spend 45 minutes on each of the 3 sections. This does mean that time is a serious issue in this paper. You need to be aware that in the 2 creative writing questions, marks can be lost for poor spelling and punctuation or grammar. And also to realise that 2 questions in the middle of the paper are based on or around the Anthology, section A, that you have studied, and the less time that you can spend in the exam reading these passages as though for the first time, the better. The final point, the point that I really want to make strongly, is this, however, that the paper is worth 70% of the overall grade attached to this examination. Now, 70% is a huge figure. What it does mean is that this paper decides your grading. This paper decides what you will essentially get in your overall English language exam. The questions are divided into 3 sections, sections A, B and C, and I will take each in order. The first section, section A, is unseen non-fiction. Now, in this section, there are usually, and I assume there always will be, 3 questions. And questions 1 and 2 are short, and they require you to give little explanation. In essence, they require you to read the passage and to present the examiner with clear, straightforward information. Question 1 is really asking you to find moments in the passage in support of a straightforward question. This is absolutely clear retrieval of information. 1 word or 1 phrase per mark. Quite clear. Incidentally, in the paper I've just marked, the most common error was not relating the words that were found to sound, which was specified in the question, but just to generally describing the fire. This idea, therefore, that you must answer the question becomes important. In question 2, please notice in your own words. You're not expected to quote, you'll get no marks for quoting, and usually quoting takes longer. Question 2 is a question which asks you to interpret the passage, to find the relevant information, express it in your own words. Very, very limited explanation, if any at all, is needed. And remember, it is again essentially 1 point for 1 mark. If you only make 2 points and then spend a given time discussing how the words create this effect, whatever it might be, you will not get credit for that in this paper. So do not waste time, as I say at the bottom, on detailed analysis of language on these 2 questions. These are quick. These are the £100 I want to be a millionaire questions. Techniques in these questions are fairly straightforward. You'll need to skim read, this idea of moving quickly and efficiently through the passage and in a chronological order, noticing keywords. By all means, use your pen, underline, asterisks in the margin, whatever. The paper is yours to draw all over. Before you even start to read, I would read question 1 first, and then you can skim looking for the answers to that question. You might even do the same with question 2. In any question of this type, however, just consider basic paragraphing. Essentially, in many, if not to say most, paragraphs in non-fiction writing, the beginning of the paragraph will give you information. The middle of the paragraph will tend to explain and describe the information that has been given, and then maybe a development of that information will be towards the end of the paragraph, which in turn may well link into the paragraph that follows it. Quite apart from anything else, this should give you an idea when you're reading of where you're looking for the information that the examiners require you to give. Okay, the last part of question 3 is a more engaged analysis of the non-fiction passage. There will be in the question bullet points, helping you to focus your response. Use them, and use them both to focus the content but also to help you structure. Make it easy for the examiner. In the mark scheme, the examiner is given typical responses that they're looking for, but these are based on the bullet points. In other words, if you don't relate to the bullet points, the examiner is going to have to work harder. If you're being examined by an English teacher with plenty of time on their hands and so on and so forth, it may not be a problem. But in reality, when you're being examined by somebody who's working their way through a pile of maybe 200 papers with a fairly short time limit, you don't want to risk, if you like, the human factor becoming an element in the marking of your paper. Then please notice this bit here in bold. The mark scheme requires valid points which have an engagement with the text and an appreciation of the writer's techniques. Valid points. In other words, you've got to be answering the question, which have an engagement with the text. In other words, you're quoting, albeit maybe only single words, and an appreciation of the writer's techniques. This is, therefore, without any question, a PEE or Pearl piece of writing. That is a given. My final point really on this is try to make sure that you're drawing elements in your answer from the whole passage. Help the examiner to give you marks for, if you like, a thorough understanding of the passage by giving him something from the beginning, from the middle, and from the end. Before we move to question B, think. This is 3 questions. You were given 45 minutes, roughly, for these 3 questions. You're going to need around half an hour for question 3 to do it justice, because you will need to plan. That means that the first 2 questions have got to be quick. Think about it. You cannot afford to waste time in the beginning of the paper. Section B, the second section, is the section which focuses on the anthology and the material which, hopefully, you have prepared thoroughly with your teacher in the run-up to the exam. It's based on section A of the anthology, the non-fiction section, the section with the beach poster and the climate change website and so on. In essence, the better you know the anthology, the easier you will find this section. Think again about time. 45 minutes for this section. 2 questions, but again, the second question is a creative writing question. I'm looking at roughly 15 minutes on the first question, and this includes reading time. Again, as much as anything else, this paper relies on you being organised. The better students in terms of responses that I saw in the papers I marked this spring were students who had written at the top of each question in the question paper, or at the top of each section, the timing that they felt they could allow themselves. In other words, if they were moving on to it at 10 o'clock, they had written 10 to 10:45 at the top, and obviously stuck to it. It helps. It might be a technique to use. So in section B, this was the question, wasn't it? How does the writer try to share her experience of being at the race? This was based on the headless goat story. And I think the question is slightly tricky in the way it's phrased. It didn't fool people, but I could sense that people were slightly uncomfortable with what was required of them. In essence, I think this is a how does the writer make the passage exciting or engaging question, and should be treated in that way. The point is already, this is a how does question, therefore it is a question that is based in techniques. How does the writer write, rather than simply recounting what the story consists of. Look for all the usual trappers within it when you're answering a question like that, because these are the techniques that writers use. And then, because this is travel writing, it tells an exciting tale, concentrate on this sense of engaging us with perhaps the excitement and, hopefully, some sense of contrast within your writing. You're encouraged to quote, and you should quote, but you're encouraged to make brief quotations. Again, little point in writing laboriously half a paragraph. Look for the key words, try to embed them into your text. Keep quotations brief. Finally, you know this passage well, you've prepared it, and it stands to reason that some of the things that you have prepared about any passage will not be relevant to that question that year. It's a shame, but there you go. There's no point filling your answer with these ideas. They probably won't gain any marks, and actually all they're doing is wasting time. A good example in this passage was the reference to the Kibble donkey and how it can run at 40 miles an hour or whatever it was, this sort of thing. I could Google that from my desk. That doesn't in any way show that I'm part of this race, that it's part of my experience of being there. That is clear information text popped into the narrative in order to, well, to a degree, to split it all up. Actually, partly to increase tension, because whilst we read that passage, we want to find out what goes on beyond. So just be aware that a detailed conversation about that is not really necessarily going to give you marks. Not everything you know is applicable to every essay you ever write. Question 4, I think there are ideas to addressing question 4. We're looking for how does the writer... And I've put these down at the moment, or these 3 down, as 3 S's. Obviously we can use trappers, all these things. 3 S's. Look for the setting, look for the senses, and look for interesting sentences. If you do this, you should find that your writing becomes much easier because you're focused in the thought processes that you have to find. Setting, place, time of day, weather, other conditions. What do they do with them? How do they describe them? Are they using pathetic fallacy? Is it relevant? Probably yes. Senses. Any writer trying to engage us, particularly in travel writing, will be using our senses. Therefore, we are looking for writing which engages the senses. Look for onomatopoeia, look for alliteration when we're looking at sound. Look for people writing about smell. Look for people describing a place in such a way that our sight is being called upon to be used. And then look for the unusual in the sentences. A very short sentence will have been deliberately written. Why? Your job is to spot the effect. But the idea is you're looking for these sentences that are different. And before you finish writing about them, just make a note of how they're punctuated. Is there anything interesting there? Just think about the range of punctuation there might be, the difference between a sentence that ends in a full stop and a sentence that ends in an exclamation mark. The next question, question 5, again, if you know your anthology quite well, this question is probably easier than if you don't. However, I would argue that you don't need to know your anthology in order to be able to answer this question. The point about it is that it's related to the themes of the anthology passage that was used in question 4, and I think part of your revision should be to look through the passages and work out what the possible themes of the passages might be. It seems to me to be slightly complex, and it seems to me to be also, to a degree, slightly loosely applied. There was a question in the mock that my group sat in the winter, which was a passage from Touching the Void, and the students were asked to write about an exciting rescue. Now, given that an exciting rescue never really appears in Touching the Void, in the sense that it's one man against the mountain rather than necessarily a huge rescue attempt, I'm not sure what the theme is here in terms of the passage. The passage was about breaking his leg, falling off the mountain and being told he was going to die. But anyway, there is a theme, and we take it. The mark scheme, you need to know, clearly expects a relationship to be made between audience and purpose in this piece, and therefore you need to make sure that you note the format descriptors in the question. I've said on the final piece of this slide, use trappers, but I think it's the format that we need to concentrate on. Trappers, if you are not familiar with trappers, it's a mnemonic like so many, and this is the layout. Now the point about this is you can rarely use them all in any one piece of writing. It might look very contrived if you try, but you should be able to get quite a lot of them in, and if you do, and particularly if you try and open a piece of writing with a good, strong trapper, be it a rhetorical question, be it a poll or a statistic, be it really emotive language in sentences that have been structured for effect. All of that, but 3 of them, creating repetition, for example, then, and a triplet, then you are going to find that you will produce a piece of writing which automatically will start to help the examiner relax and give you a good mark. So, that's trappers. Look at this slide. Take a moment. If you don't know these, take a moment now to write them down. Get them glued into your brain. When you're ready, move on to the next slide. Okay, this is the question that was used in this piece. Write a description of the event or an occasion which was important to you. And it strikes me that this is not particularly prescriptive. I can see in front of me that the slide has gone wrong, so you can sort of ignore the slide at the moment and just listen to me. Question 5 is not a transactional question. It's a question focused on genre, really, and the key word here is description. As long as you are describing, you should be okay. What this means is that there isn't really any space in this question for bland, empty telling of a story or explaining why this event was going on. This is a descriptive question, so we'll move on from that to section C. The third and final part of the exam, 45 minutes, you're watching your time, and think about it, this is a third of the marks of the paper. It's one question. That means you will plan. It means you will use trappers. And it means you will pay close attention to format. Now, this is a transactional piece, and it should always be a transactional piece, so notice it. It has a clear slap, a clear subject, language, audience and purpose, which is laid out in the question, and you need to find it. Now, on the next slide, you'll see big sort of speakies which have notes in to remind you, but just quickly working with the text down here. First things to notice are, then, that you are writing a letter. That will have certain conventions which you have to show the examiner you have understood. The examiner probably isn't going to penalise you for not writing an address, but I think they will, or they should, penalise you for not using a correct salutation. That's dear sir, dear Mr. Jenkins, dear grandma. You know, if it's a very informal letter, hi John, whatever it might be. And also to sign off at the end in the right way. Yours faithfully, yours sincerely, yours with love. See you on Thursday, or whatever it might be. You're then told you're writing what for? A local newspaper. And again, there must be an implication, and they've bothered to say local here, in terms of what they expect. Local newspapers are often not as formal in the way they're written as national newspapers, and also, of course, deal with, well, much more local interest. Local newspapers will carry stories that perhaps wouldn't make it into a national paper, and therefore, for something exciting in your area, this might well be a party, it might well be a street party, it might well be something that perhaps wouldn't make it into the national press. You need to notice that you've been asked to explain how the area where you live could be improved by young people. Now, you've been given bullet points to help you focus your thoughts on ways in which areas might be improved, so that's fine, use them, but make sure that you do explain. It isn't enough to simply list these things. You have to start to give reasons why they would be of benefit. And remember, explanation isn't the same as persuasion. Nobody wants to be beaten over the head with incredibly strong emotive language for the whole of this passage, if actually you're trying to explain. Explanation carries more of a sense of factual writing than persuasion, perhaps. So, here I've got a few little things scattered all over it. Dear Sir or Madam, etc. This is a formal letter. Things to think about. Explanation needs facts, organisation, details. Be precise here. And if you find it hard, don't panic. Use the bullet. 45 minutes is a long time for a good piece of writing. I think you can leave at least 10 minutes for planning. When you are planning, try and actually plan. In other words, start to think of the images, start to think of the effects you're going to create and jot them down as part of the plan. Don't leave that till later. Think about paragraph by paragraph planning using the bullets so that you really are thinking of the detail of what's going to be within each paragraph. That's a plan. It also means that when you do start, you don't have to keep stopping in order to think of the next clever image or the next clever piece of word. You could even in your planning actually start to think about which trapeze elements you're going to use where. If you're going to, and I can see absolutely no reason in almost any piece of writing why you would not, but if you're going to use direct speech, plan where you're going to use it, how you're going to use it, before you start to write the passage, so that the passage holds together. Before you then start, double check the format. Make sure you are answering in the way that the examiner wants you to, so that they can give you marks. Once you've done that, you'll have about half an hour left to write your essay, your letter, your report, your leaflet, your speech, whatever it might be that you've been asked to write. You should find, I think, in this paper, that you finish pretty well on the dot. There might be 5 minutes or so spare. My suggestion, based on where it is penalised in the mark scheme, is that you concentrate your proofreading on questions 5 and 6. Up to a third of the marks given can be awarded, if you like, for spelling, punctuation, grammar. That's a significant portion of the marks available. It is much more sense, therefore, to focus your proofreading on those two questions. Finally, there's a couple of resources that you might want to use. The first two come from my blog. Again, if you haven't already found it, do feel free to use it, whoever you may be. And they are essentially this screencast in PowerPoint form, where I promise you the later slides don't look as strange as they did on here. But also other writing, and you'll find other writing on my blog relating to Paper 1, Paper 2 and English literature. The other link on here is a link to Edexcel and to a marked, if you like, copy of this paper, which they use as material for support, and it's on the open, the free part of their website. So, armed with all these things, what more could you want? I wish you the very best of luck in your exams.